In 2007, a 3-year-old boy vanished from a crowded mall's indoor play area while his mother was just feet away. Despite frantic searches and media coverage, he was never found. 18 years later, a routine inspection uncovers a sealed maintenance door. What's behind it rewrites everything they thought they knew. The smell of cinnamon pretzels and chlorine from the central fountain filled the air as Amanda Reese adjusted her purse on one shoulder and smiled down at her 3-year-old son. Noah was laughing, chasing a plastic ball across the padded play area, his tiny sneakers lighting up with every clumsy step. Around them, the mall buzzed with families, shoppers, and the familiar, chaotic soundtrack of weekend commerce. It was just another Saturday at Rosebridge Mall. Safe, routine, unremarkable. Amanda sat down on the cushioned bench that wrapped around the enclosure, one eye always on Noah, the other on her phone. She glanced at a text from her sister, something about dinner plans, and began typing a quick reply. Just a few seconds. That was all it took. When she looked up again, the play structure was still there. The soft foam animals still sat in their fixed poses. The other children still squealed and climbed, but Noah was gone. Her heart stopped in her chest before her brain could even process what she wasn't seeing. She stood up sharply, scanning the small space. No sign of him behind the slide, not by the tunnel. He wasn't under the bench, or in the ball pit. She turned in a slow, terrified circle, eyes wide, mouth opening, and a name that came out broken. Noah? A nearby mother looked up at the panic in her voice. Amanda stepped over a toddler and hurried to the edge of the play area. Have you seen a little boy? Red jacket, light-up shoes? The other woman shook her head, her eyes narrowing with concern. Amanda's voice grew sharper. Noah! She was running now into the nearest corridor, past the food court, toward the bathroom hallway, screaming his name, her voice raw. People turned, startled, then confused, then concerned. Within minutes, mall security was notified. Announcements were made over the intercom. Shutters began closing. The entrances were locked down. But there was no sign of Noah. The security guards scanned footage from the camera overlooking the play area. Noah was visible bouncing, laughing, sitting on the spring-mounted frog. Then, at 3:17 p.m., the footage skipped, 90 seconds of static. Then it returned, and Noah was gone. No adult seen lifting him out, no blurry figure ushering him away. Amanda collapsed on the cold tile floor of the security office as the realization settled like lead in her chest. Her little boy had disappeared in broad daylight, surrounded by people, beneath the eye of a camera that had blinked at the exact wrong moment, and no one had seen anything. The mall's artificial sunlight dimmed slightly as the lockdown sequence began, casting eerie shadows across the tiled floors and storefront windows. The cheerful music that had piped through the speakers just moments ago ceased mid-song, replaced by a sterile voice over the intercom, Code Amber. All guests please remain in place. A child has been reported missing. Within minutes, metal grills clattered down over the main exits, their harsh slam echoing through the concourses. Parents gripped their children tighter. Murmurs turned into rising waves of confusion and fear, and Rosebridge Mall shifted from weekend escape to something colder, more claustrophobic. Amanda stood in the middle of the play area, arms wrapped around herself, as if doing so could hold in the panic threatening to spill from her chest. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. Around her, strangers stared, some with concern, others with suspicion, as though willing their minds to find someone to blame. A security officer in a dark jacket approached. He was young, trying to project calm, but his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Ma'am, can you walk with me? We need to confirm a timeline and get a clear description." Amanda followed him through the now emptied food court, past tables still littered with trays of uneaten meals and spilled sodas. Her legs felt numb beneath her, barely registering the sensation of walking. The security office was tucked behind a locked staff corridor, sterile and windowless, filled with glowing monitors and the low hum of electronics. A man with a badge identifying him as the head of mall security stood beside the screen, pointing at a frozen image. Noah, bright red jacket, laughing on the frog bouncer. "That's the last clear visual we have," the man said, his tone clinical. Then, at 3:17 p.m., the camera feed glitches for exactly 90 seconds. No other cameras in the vicinity picked him up. Amanda blinked at the screen. Her son's smile beamed back at her, frozen in time. 90 seconds. 90 seconds, in which the world had swallowed him whole. She gripped the edge of the table, nails biting into her palms. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "Where did he go?" "We don't know," the man admitted, softer now. Outside the office, uniformed officers moved through the corridors with search dogs. Storefronts were opened and searched, bathrooms cleared, closets pried open. Employees stood frozen behind counters. Children clutched stuffed animals tightly to their chests. But there was no trace of Noah, as if he had evaporated from the air itself. The stroller sat abandoned near the edge of the play area, its bright blue frame stark against the polished tile floor. A half-eaten bag of apple slices lay open in the cup holder, and beside it, nestled against the fabric seat, was Noah's favorite plush elephant gray, worn at the seams, one ear permanently bent from years of love. The sight of it made Amanda's throat tighten so violently she thought she might choke. Detective Jared Monroe crouched beside the stroller, his notepad already filled with frantic scribbles. "Can you walk me through everything again, Amanda?" he asked gently, his voice low and steady. "From the moment you arrived at the mall." She nodded, swallowing hard. The words didn't come easily. "We got here around 2:30. I parked on the west side, level 2. We went straight to the food court. I let Noah pick something from the smoothie place. She always gets strawberry. Then he wanted to play. I said just a few minutes." Monroe didn't interrupt. His pen moved slowly, deliberately, capturing every detail. "I set the stroller here," she said, gesturing vaguely as her eyes welled up. "I took off his coat. It was warm inside. He climbed in right away. He was laughing, just laughing. He always loved the little spinning tunnel. He didn't even notice I was watching him. And then," her voice cracked, "my sister texted. I was confirming dinner plans. I looked down at my phone. Not even a minute." "Did anyone approach him while he played? Any adults near him?" Monroe asked. Amanda shook her head. "There were other kids, a few parents, no one suspicious. I didn't see anyone. I didn't feel anything wrong." Outside the police tape, the mall had quieted into a strange hush. The kind that comes after the initial panicked weight of fear settling into everyone's bones. Reporters had begun to gather near the main entrance, their long camera lenses pointing toward the play area, catching glimpses of investigators and flashing red tape. By evening, an image began circulating on news stations and social media. The empty stroller, a single soft toy left behind. "Boy, 3, vanishes from mall play area, authorities search for leads." Amanda watched the footage from the security office, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to contain her own unraveling. She hadn't even buckled him in. He'd climbed out so fast, so eager to play. She told herself that if she just held his hand a few seconds longer, if she just ignored her phone, he'd still be here. Every second replayed in her mind, like broken glass under bare feet. The silence from the play area still echoed, louder than any scream. The hum of the surveillance room felt louder than usual, as if the silence between words carried a kind of charge. Amanda sat stiffly in a borrowed chair, her eyes fixed on the banks of monitors, each one flickering with footage from the day Noah vanished. Detective Monroe stood behind the lead technician, arms crossed tightly, his expression unreadable. They had watched the same sequence 5 times now. Noah on the frog bouncer. Noah laughing, wobbling toward the plastic tunnel. 3:16 p.m. And then, static. Fuzzy gray and white snow washed across the screen. The timestamp in the top corner froze, then jumped forward. 3:17:32 p.m. Just like that, 92 seconds were gone. When the feed resumed, the play area was unchanged, except for the absence of one small boy in a red jacket. No struggle. No adult seen reaching for him. No exit. He was simply gone. "We've checked every angle," the technician said, his voice flat with exhaustion. None of the other cameras picked up anything. North corridor, west exit, even the elevators. They were all functioning normally. This one glitched. Amanda's hands gripped the armrests, white-knuckled. You're telling me the camera that watched my son just happened to fail in the exact minute he disappeared? It happens sometimes, the tech replied, but even he didn't sound convinced. The system is old. Could be a software update, a power surge maybe, even interference from a new store device. We're still investigating. Detective Monroe leaned forward. I want you to pull logs for every camera in the building. All diagnostics, all system events for the last 48 hours. I want to know what time the cameras rebooted, what triggered it, and if any other feeds showed anomalies. You said nothing showed Noah leaving. That's impossible. A 3-year-old doesn't vanish into thin air. Amanda stood suddenly, her chest tight with fury. Someone took him. Someone knew that camera would go down. You don't lose a child like this unless someone planned it. The technician looked down, shame clouding his face. Monroe placed a gentle hand on Amanda's shoulder. We're going to find out what happened, but we're not ruling anything out. By evening, investigators combed the server room, pulling wiring diagrams and export logs, desperate to trace the fault. News vans waited outside like vultures, eager to pounce on any update. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread about possible inside jobs, mall staff gone missing, even whispered theories of trafficking rings. But the truth remained maddeningly simple. There were 90 seconds no one could explain. 90 seconds where the world went dark, and a little boy Wachter was taken into silence. The calls never stopped. For weeks after the story broke, Amanda's phone rang at all hours, sometimes from police, sometimes from reporters, but mostly from strangers. People who swore they'd seen a boy matching Noah's description in gas stations, grocery stores, at a rest stop off I-5. Some were well-meaning, some weren't. One woman sent a photo of her neighbor's child, demanding authorities investigate. A man from Kentucky claimed Noah was living in his basement, in spirit. Another tip led police to a motel room in New Mexico, where they found a toddler asleep in front of a flickering television. Wrong child. Wrong life. Wrong mother. Amanda tried to keep track at first, each lead carefully logged in a notebook she bought just for that purpose. Sightings, she wrote across the top in neat block letters. She numbered each one, clinging to the hope that the right entry might one day lead her back to her son. By the time she reached 74, the ink began to blur beneath the pressure of her pen. By 100, she stopped counting. Her husband, Dean, tried to stay strong. For the first few weeks, he held her hand in bed every night, whispering reassurances in the dark. "We'll get him back," he said. We have to believe that. But hope has a shelf life, and grief, when shared unequally, corrodes even the deepest bonds. Dean went back to work 2 months after Noah disappeared, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Amanda couldn't. The walls of the house felt like skin, stretched over old wounds. Every corner held a memory, every hallway echoed with Noah's voice. She couldn't look at the high chair in the kitchen or the tiny shoes by the door without feeling like her chest was caving in. The worst day wasn't when the police called to say another tip had turned out to be nothing. It was the day Dean gently placed the car keys on the counter, looked at her with hollow eyes and said, "I can't keep doing this, Amanda. You're living in a ghost house." And I'm disappearing right along with him. He moved into his brother's place that night. Amanda didn't argue. She just watched from the window as his taillights faded into the evening fog. The psychic came soon after, a woman named Carol, soft-spoken, with gauzy scarves and watery eyes. "He's alive," she said, touching Amanda's wrist. "Somewhere underground, hidden, but watched over." Amanda didn't believe her, but she listened anyway. It was something, a fragment, a thread. And right then, a thread was better than nothing. The Rosebridge Mall had once gleamed like a jewel beneath the suburban sky, its polished floors, glass railings, and towering atrium a symbol of community pride. Now, 18 years later, its shine had dulled. One by one, the storefronts had emptied, replaced by for lease signs with curling edges. Escalators that once ferried families and teenagers now groaned under their own disuse. The fountain in the center court, once a gurgling attraction where children tossed pennies and made whispered wishes, had long since been drained, leaving only a dry, cracked basin rimmed with dust. Elise Moreno walked through the west corridor with a clipboard tucked under one arm and her eyes sweeping every corner. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, a former military police officer turned private sector security consultant. Her job now was straightforward: modernize the mall's outdated systems, update the security staff, and, if possible, restore a sense of safety to a space that had quietly decayed under the weight of memory. She'd read the old reports, of course. Everyone local had heard of the boy. Noah Reese, 3 years old, vanished from the play area while his mother answered a text. Elise had pulled the file from the mall archives on her first day. It was thin, too thin. A few photocopied news clippings, an internal incident report, a brief timeline. Most of the footage had been lost years ago when the system was upgraded. The police had called it cold. But Elise didn't like unsolved things. She paused at the now-defunct play area, stripped of color, the padding torn in places. No children had played there in years. It wasn't just sadness that kept people away. It was something more primal, more superstitious. Parents didn't bring their kids to the place where a child had simply vanished. The mall had stopped advertising family events shortly after. Her radio crackled. "Miss Moreno, tech team's in the server room. You wanted a walkthrough?" "On my way," she replied, her voice even. She took the long way around, passing shuttered stores, dimmed lights, and forgotten signs, offering seasonal sales from a decade ago. The place didn't just feel abandoned, felt paused, as if it were waiting for something. Elise didn't believe in ghosts, but there was something in the air here, stillness. A hush that had settled across the mall like dust on glass. Something had happened here, something still unfinished. The blueprints were stored in a brittle folder marked 1986 in fading marker. Elise slid the papers across the maintenance office table, their edges yellowed, the ink bled slightly from decades of humidity. She had requested them out of habit more than anything else. When systems failed, it was often the building itself: poor layouts, blind corners, exits that weren't exits. Security was as much about architecture as it was about cameras. But as she traced the layout of the ground floor with a fingertip, something unsettled her. The schematic clearly showed 4 service corridors branching out from the main maintenance hall. 3 were accounted for; she'd walked them herself, narrow concrete arteries that fed power lines, ventilation, plumbing. The 4th, though it branched eastward behind the food court, curving slightly and ending in what was labeled Utility Access 4C. The problem was, there was no Utility Access 4C on her current maps. None of the staff, including those who had worked at Rosebridge for years, recalled any such hallway. She frowned. She flipped to the renovation records from 2003, the year before the mall began its slow decline. That corridor was still there on paper. But in the updated blueprints from the mall's digital files uploaded in 2014, it was gone. Not rerouted, not renamed, just erased. "Matt!" Elise called over her shoulder, gesturing to the young technician who had been replacing monitors in the back office. He looked up from his toolbox. "Yeah? Do you know this area?" She turned the blueprints toward him. "Here, behind the old vending alcove outside the loading zone." He peered at the map. "That's just solid wall now, I think. Maybe an old janitor's closet that got sealed up?" Elise tapped the diagram. "It's not marked as a closet, and this hallway should be at least 20 feet long. It ends in something. Probably just a storage crawl. That part of the mall hasn't been touched in years." Elise didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the blueprint, following the phantom hallway to its dead end. Sometimes buildings forget themselves. Walls are put up hastily. Spaces get sealed, people move on, and no one remembers what was left behind. But Elise had seen enough in her career to know this. When a structure lies to you, it's never innocent. She made a note in her pad. Tomorrow, she would find that wall. and see if it still knew how to keep its secrets. The vending alcove was tucked between a shuttered pretzel stand and a defunct arcade, its tiles scuffed from years of foot traffic, gum, and time. The machines themselves were ancient tone, still displayed the faded logo of a discontinued soda. Another bore a hand-scrawled, out of order, sign so old the ink had turned a reddish brown. Most people walked past without even glancing. But Elise wasn't most people. She stood before the machines in the quiet morning hours. Mall lights flickering lazily overhead. The mall hadn't opened yet, and the corridor was bathed in the mechanical hum of distant HVAC units. She had brought the blueprint with her, folded crisply, marked with red lines. The hallway in question should be right here behind this wall. She reached out and knocked. The sound was off. Not the solid thunk of reinforced concrete, but a muted echo, like tapping on a hollow core. Elise crouched, pressing her fingers along the wall to the left of the vending unit. At first, nothing. Then she saw it just above the floor, a hairline seam running horizontally, barely perceptible in the dim light. She stood and followed the line up with her fingertips. A vertical seam intersected it. A rectangle. A door. By noon, she had a locksmith and a two-man maintenance crew on site. The vending machines had been wheeled away, revealing more of the false panel. The crew worked carefully, scraping at old caulk, removing screws hidden beneath layers of paint. Elise stood back, arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. The locksmith knelt, inserting a flat tool into a shallow groove. "Whoever sealed this didn't want it found," he murmured. With a soft click, the mechanism gave. The door shifted slightly, creaking inward. A rush of stale air pushed out, thick and slow, like breath from an open crypt. The smell hit first. It wasn't rotat, least not fresh, but it was dense, fermented. Mold, damp cloth, rust, something sour and chemical. The maintenance lead gagged and stepped back. "Jesus," he muttered. Elise didn't flinch. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped forward, illuminating the narrow corridor beyond. The walls were bare concrete, the floor coated in dust and broken bits of ceiling tile. It stretched ahead into shadow. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She simply stepped inside. Behind her, the rusted door creaked slightly on its hinges, as if reluctant to let the light in. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness like a blade, revealing years of stillness frozen in dust. Elise stepped slowly into the corridor, boots crunching against fallen plaster and scattered debris. The air was heavy with a damp, metallic taste, the kind that coated the tongue and whispered of water damage and forgotten things. Her light panned across the wall's bare concrete, no markings. Pipes clung to the ceiling like metal vines, some still dripping faintly, forming stagnant puddles in the low spots of the floor. The corridor stretched deeper than the blueprints had suggested. Narrow, maybe 5 feet across, lined with recessed alcoves that had once been utility closets or storage rooms. Most of the doors were ajar, warped with age, revealing only rusted shelving and broken crates. One room had a collapsed ceiling panel and a single mop handle sticking out from the wreckage like a marker in a shallow grave. The deeper Elise walked, the colder it felt, not in temperature, but in atmosphere, like the weight of the air thickened the further she stepped from the mall's walls. She stopped at a curve in the hallway where the beam caught something unnatural against the dull grays and browns. Color. A scrap of paper taped to the wall, curled at the corners. Elise stepped closer, heart suddenly louder in her chest. It was a drawing childlike, uneven. Thick, crayon lines sketched the outline of a house with a red roof, a figure in blue beside a smaller figure in red. Above them was a lopsided sun and clouds floating like cotton balls. At the bottom, a name, Noah, and in the corner, written in pencil, faint but legible, 1009. Elise stared at it, her breath frozen. The drawing had been taped up carefully, 2 pieces of yellowed masking tape holding the corners flat. She reached out, her gloved fingers brushing the edge, half expecting it to vanish like something conjured by exhaustion. But it held, real, physical. A child had been down here. Not just passing through, not hiding, living. She looked around the hallway again, eyes scanning every surface. There was a smear on the wall beside the drawing, low, like from a small hand dragging as it moved. Further down, something else glinted faintly, under the flashlight a button, pink and plastic, lying beside a cracked tile. The corridor wasn't empty. It never had been. The door was different from the other shavier, with no handle on the outside. It sat at the very end of the corridor, flush against the wall, as if it were never meant to be noticed. Elise had walked past it once already, only realizing it was a doorway when her light caught the faint outline of a lock plate buried beneath layers of paint and corrosion. She called it in before going any further. By the time Detective Monroe arrived with 2 officers in tow, the maintenance crew had pried it open using crowbars and a cutting saw. The door gave way with a tortured screech, metal grinding against metal, and released a breath of air so stale it stung the eyes. Elise was the first to step in. Her flashlight trembled slightly in her grip, not from fear exactly, but from something close to it. The room was barely larger than a walk-in closet. The air hung thick and unmoving, as if even time had hesitated here. The walls were unfinished concrete, pockmarked with moisture stains. The single bulb overhead had long since burned out, leaving everything to the narrow beam of her light. A thin, filthy mattress sat against the far wall, its stuffing exposed and flattened with age. Next to it, a rusted folding chair and a pile of empty tin cansus, beans, spaghetti stacked in quiet, greasy pyramids. A plastic milk crate held a jumble of toys, a cracked Etch-a-Sketch, a handful of action figures with their paint worn smooth, and a small plush elephant with a missing eye. Monroe stepped in behind her, lifting his own flashlight toward the ceiling. "Someone lived here," he said quietly. "Not just someone," Elise murmured, stepping forward. Her light caught on the back wall there, scratched deep into the cement, were 3 letters. Jagged, child height, the edges dark with old rust or blood. N.R. She felt the breath catch in her throat. Monroe stepped beside her, reading the initials aloud. Noah Reese. No one spoke for a long moment. The sound of distant HVAC machinery filtered in faintly from above, a reminder that the rest of the mall still existed, shiny, lit, indifferent. But down here, in this cold, forgotten space, the truth was beginning to bloom. 18 years. Someone had built a life in secret. Someone had eaten, played, slept down here, hidden just beyond reach. Elise turned toward Monroe, her voice low and tight. "We've been walking over this room for nearly 2 decades. The lab called just after dawn." Detective Monroe answered on the first ring, his voice low and gravel-thick from a night of no sleep. Elise sat across from him in the dimly lit security office, fingers wrapped tightly around a styrofoam cup of coffee gone cold. She watched his face closely as he listened, the silence stretching thin between them. Then came the small shift, the drop of his shoulders, the slight widening of his eyes. He hung up slowly, turning to her. "It's him," he said. "The fingerprints on the toy, the DNA on the mattress both match Noah Reese." Elise didn't move at first. It felt like hearing a ghost's name spoken out loud, like an incantation pulled from the air. Noah Reese. Not just a story, not just a faded flyer on a bulletin board. A real boy, who had lived, who had breathed, who had been here. "They matched him to his baby things," Monroe continued, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "They had DNA from his baby book hair clippings, a saliva sample Amanda submitted years ago. The lab ran it 3 times to be sure." Elise stood slowly. Her knees ached from sitting too long, her thoughts from knowing too little. "So he was here. For how long?" "Forensics estimates years," Monroe said. "Based on decomposition of food remnants, the age of dust layers. The nesting behavior, the child wasn't just held here. He stayed, grew." The drawings on the walls, they're dated. 9, 11, one from as late as 2015. He paused. "That's 8 years ago." Elise frowned. "So what happened after that?" "No signs of recent habitation," Monroe replied. but no signs of death either. No blood, no body, no evidence of struggle, just absence. She walked to the wall where the monitors played back security feeds from the previous night. The camera near the maintenance alcove now held a fresh angle just in case. But it was still and empty. Just a quiet hallway no one had noticed in years. "He could be anywhere," she said softly. Monroe nodded. "Or nearby." They both turned when a soft knock came at the door. A young officer poked his head in, face pale. "You should see this," he said. "Pawn shop downtown. Guy came in trying to sell old toys. One matched the drawing we found in the room. Surveillance got a good image." Elise met Monroe's eyes. "Let's go." The footage was grainy, pulled from a pawn shop security system that hadn't been updated in over a decade. But the figure on the screen was clear enough to steal the air from the room. He was thin, almost gaunt, with shaggy hair that fell across his forehead and hollow eyes that scanned every corner of the shop like prey watching for a predator. His clothes were layered and oversized army, surplus jacket, faded jeans, scuffed boots. He walked with a strange, guarded rhythm, his shoulders always slightly hunched, as if he had learned long ago to take up less space. The timestamp on the video was from 3 days ago. The young man stepped up to the counter and set down a canvas tote bag. He didn't speak much, just nodded at the clerk and pointed. From the bag, he withdrew items one at a time. An action figure with its limbs fused from age, a small tin robot with chipped paint, a tattered plush elephant with a missing ear. The clerk looked barely interested, sorting through them with the indifference of someone who'd seen it all. But Elise knew better. She leaned closer to the screen, freezing the frame just as the plush elephant changed hands. It was the same one they'd found in the underground room. Same patch on the stomach, same lopsided, stitched smile. "Zoom in," she said. The technician adjusted the playback. The young man's face flickered into clearer view. He looked no older than 20, though his skin had the pallor of someone who hadn't seen much sunlight. His expression was cautious, his gaze darting toward the door more than once. "Do we have audio?" Monroe asked. "No mic near the register," the clerk replied from the back of the room. "He didn't say a name. Paid him $30 for the lot." Elise turned away from the screen, her pulse steady but rising. "He's not just pawning junk. These are his toys. He's cleaning out the past." Monroe nodded slowly. "Means he's not hiding anymore. He's surfacing." The clerk handed over a small form of seller's log, required by state law. No ID was given, but the young man had written a name, Jonah. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had in 18 years. And somewhere, not far from where he'd been lost, Noah Reesenow Jonah was walking among them. The phone rang during the quietest part of the morning, when sunlight had only just begun to seep through the blinds, and the house still held its hush of sleep. Amanda was in the kitchen, barefoot on cool tile, pouring coffee she didn't need yet. The screen on her phone lit up with an unknown number, but something in her stomach flipped before she even touched it. She answered with a tentative, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was low and calm, practiced but human. "Mrs. Holbrook? This is Detective Jared Monroe, Rosebridge Police Department." Amanda didn't speak at first. That name the town hit her like a knock to the ribs. She hadn't heard from anyone there in years. She wasn't Mrs. Reese anymore. Holbrook came later, after therapy, after time, after she'd learned how to wake up without expecting to find a child's room still waiting for her. "Yes," she said finally, her voice already fraying at the edges. "Two used to live there. Is this about—" "It's about Noah." She didn't remember sitting down, but suddenly she was on the floor, her back against the cabinets, the ceramic mug rolling away from her hand in a slow circle. "He's dead," she said automatically. It was the phrase she'd trained herself to say. Not because she believed it, but because the world had forced her to act like she did. "No, ma'am," the detective said softly. "We think he's alive." Amanda closed her eyes and felt the air vanish from the room. "Say that again." "We discovered a sealed-off section beneath Rosebridge Malin, old maintenance corridor. We found a room. Personal belongings. A child's name carved into the wall. N.R. We've confirmed DNA and fingerprints. The evidence suggests that Noah lived there for several years." She couldn't speak. Her breath came in gasps now, her lungs struggling to match the pace of her heart. "A young man recently surfaced in town, selling items identical to the ones found in that room. We have surveillance footage and a name Jonah. We're trying to confirm whether he's your son." Amanda whispered his name, not the new one, but the old one. The only one that ever mattered. Noah. The call ended with a promise. More information would follow. But Amanda remained on the kitchen floor long after the line went dead, shaking, hands clutched over her mouth. For the first time in 18 years, hope returned violent, uninvited, and utterly unbearable. The halfway house sat on the edge of town, tucked behind a shuttered auto repair shop and a faded billboard advertising a soda that hadn't been sold in years. It was the kind of place people passed without noticing, where the walls were thin and the beds had names carved into the wood from tenants long gone. The front door buzzed open with a tired electric click as Detective Monroe stepped inside, flashing his badge to the house manager. "You here for Jonah?" the man asked, already nodding toward the stairs. "Quiet kid. Keeps to himself. Been here about 4 months. Came in without ID, just the clothes on his back and a duffel bag with next to nothing in it. We gave him the name. He chose it?" The manager shrugged. "Didn't argue when we offered it. Wasn't big on talking. Still isn't." Monroe followed the man up the narrow staircase, past peeling paint and a hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. Room 3B was at the end. A nameplate hung crooked on the door, but it was blank. The manager knocked twice, then cracked the door open. "Jonah? Got someone here to see you." The boy-no, the young man, was sitting cross-legged on the bed, a tattered paperback in his lap, eyes lifted but guarded. He had the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His features were sharper now than the toddler Amanda had lost cheekbones, more defined, jaw squared with age, but there was something unmistakable in the eyes, wide and cautious, wounded but watching. "Jonah," Monroe said gently, stepping into the room. "My name's Jared. I work with the Rosebridge Police Department. I was hoping you might talk with me for a few minutes." Jonah looked at him, blinking once, then nodded. "We think we may know who you are," Monroe continued, sitting down across from him. "We think your name might not be Jonah at all." "I don't have a name," Jonah said, his voice even but distant, like reciting from a script. "They called me that here. I didn't argue. Do you remember anything from before you came here?" Jonah hesitated, then shook his head. "No, just dark places, a small room, rules, food through a slot, a voice on the other side of the wall. Not a name, not a face." Monroe leaned forward. "Do you remember ever hearing the name Noah?" The young man's lips parted slightly. A flicker passed through his eyes. Not recognition, but something. A shift. A crack in the silence. "I don't know," he whispered. "Maybe." Amanda sat in the small beige room at the county building, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes locked on the closed door across from her. The walls were painted a calming blue that did nothing to settle her nerves. She had been here for over an hour, though time no longer moved in minutes but in heartbeats, each one louder than the last. She kept her breath shallow, afraid that if she let it come too fast, it would become a sob. The DNA test had been taken days earlier, a quick swab, a sterile cotton tip that had brushed the inside of Jonah's cheek while he sat motionless in a plastic chair. He hadn't asked questions, just watched Amanda quietly from across the room like she was a painting familiar but unreachable. Now, they waited. Together. The door opened with a slow creak, and Detective Monroe entered, holding a plain manila folder. He looked at Amanda first, then at the young man sitting beside her. Jonah didn't turn. His fingers toyed with a rubber band he had found on the floor, stretching it tight, letting it snap back into itself. "The results are in," Monroe said gently. Amanda stood. Her knees trembled. "It's a match," he said, voice soft but clear. "Jonah is Noah Reese. 99.9%. Something inside her buckled, Her hands flew to her mouth, as if trying to catch the moment before it escaped. She wanted to fall to her knees, to scream, to gather him in her arms and cry out to the heavens. But instead, she just stared at him, at her son, alive, breathing, right here. Jonah finally looked up. His eyes were unreadable, but his hands had gone still. "You're my mother," he said, not as a question but as a quiet statement, an attempt to place something heavy into the air and see if it stayed there. Amanda stepped closer. She didn't touch him, not yet. She was afraid to, afraid he might flinch. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. I never stopped looking for you." He looked away, blinking rapidly. I thought I'd made you up." "You didn't." Her voice broke. "You never did." For a moment, the silence felt holy. Then, slowly, Jonah stood. Not fully remembering, not fully trusting, but moving toward her all the same. And Amanda opened her arms. The therapist's office smelled faintly of lavender and dust, the scent of calm and something forgotten. Jonah sat on the couch, legs pulled up beneath him, his eyes fixed on the carpet. Amanda sat nearby, close enough to reach him if he asked, far enough not to overwhelm. The room was painted in muted earth tones, the kind that suggested warmth, safety, but nothing about this felt safe. "I remember." "Light," Jonah said slowly, voice low and halting. "Not sunlight. The other kind. Buzzing, humming, like the sound was alive. I hated it. He said it kept me awake so I wouldn't forget what time it was." The therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Hanley, nodded gently. "He? I don't know his name," Jonah said. "He didn't use it. He was always behind the door. I wasn't supposed to look when it opened. Just take the food and go back. He had rules." "What kind of rules?" Dr. Hanley asked. Jonah blinked slowly, like the words were trapped somewhere deeper than his mouth. "No talking after 9, lights out by 10, no crying unless I was hurt, and even then, only a little." His voice cracked on that last part, but he didn't stop. "If I cried too much, he took something away, a toy, food, time." Amanda flinched, her hand curling into her lap, nails digging into her skin. She didn't interrupt. "He said you gave me away," Jonah continued, still not looking at her. "He said I was too noisy, that I made too much mess, and you didn't want me anymore, that I had to learn how to be better before I could go back into the world." Dr. Hanley watched him carefully. "Did you believe him?" "I did." Jonah's voice was barely audible. "I was 3, maybe 4. He told me I'd broken things, and that's why you left. That I had to stay in the dark until I learned how to be quiet." "Good." Amanda couldn't hold back then. Her breath caught on a sob, sharp and painful. Jonah looked up, startled not at the sound, but at the emotion behind it. "I never left you," she said, her voice raw. "You were taken. I searched every single day. I never gave up." Jonah looked at her for a long time. "I think I knew," he whispered, "but I was afraid knowing would make it worse." The file was thin, far thinner than Elise had expected. Just a few sheets of paper tucked into a manila folder, the top corner stamped with an outdated Rosebridge Mall logo and the faded words, "Employee termination, Massey, Gerald." She slid the first page free. Hired in 2005. Terminated mid-2007, barely 3 weeks after Noah Reese had vanished. No disciplinary marks, no write-up, just a line at the bottom in indifferent ink. Employee failed to return from scheduled shift. No further contact. Position closed. That was it. No follow-up, no missing person report, no contact with family. Gerald Massey had simply stopped showing up and no one had noticed. "Lived alone," Monroe said, flipping through a police database printout beside her. "No emergency contact. Rented a basement apartment on the east side. Paid cash for most things." His lease ended the month he disappeared. Landlord assumed he skipped out. No one ever filed a report. He just disappeared. "Or hid," Elise murmured. Monroe handed her another paper. "We ran his name through regional storage unit records. Found a match. Locker 304 at Pine Gate Storage. Paid for 5 years in advance, in cash." The lease expired a while ago, but the unit was never cleared, still sealed. They were already moving. By mid-afternoon, they stood beneath a corrugated metal awning as rain tapped steadily on the roof. A security guard led them through rusting aisles of padlocked doors, each numbered in chipped paint. Locker 304 sat at the far end, a dent in its center, rust blooming like a wound. Elise crouched and fitted the master key into the lock. It clicked open with reluctant resistance, the shackles springing free like something exhaling for the first time in years. She and Monroe pulled the door up slowly. The smell hit them first: old cardboard, mildew, something deeper underneath. Inside, stacked neatly along one wall, were boxes. Labeled not with contents, but with dates. 2007, 2008, 2008, 2010, 2010, 2012. Elise opened the nearest one. Inside were small, organized bundles, child-sized clothing, crayon drawings folded carefully, a tape recorder. And on top of it all, a single photograph, yellowing at the corners. A boy with wild hair, standing in what looked like a concrete room, holding a toy robot. His expression was blank. His eyes, Jonah's eyes, stared straight into the camera. Monroe stepped back, face pale. "He kept records," Elise said, her voice low. "This wasn't just about hiding. He was documenting." The rain had begun to seep into the corners of the storage unit, dripping in steady rhythm as Elise peeled open the second box. The cardboard had grown soft with time, edges sagging, the contents within still unnervingly intact. She pulled out a stack of drawings, first each one folded twice and numbered in the top corner, as if part of a collection. They were done in crayon and pencil, some in faded marker, simple shapes. A square house with no windows, a stick figure boy, a figure looming beside him, featureless and dark. She unfolded one labeled 37, a room with gray walls, a table, a slot in the door. Monroe said nothing as he held up the first VHS tape from the stack. A label had been written carefully in blocky capital letters, N, Year 1, below it, Week 12. There were over a dozen tapes, each marked by a similar pattern: dates, numbers, always the same single letter, N. Jonah. Elise set the drawings aside and reached for a leather-bound notebook, its pages stiff with age. Inside was a grid, neat columns, dates running down the side. The title, handwritten in blue ink, sat centered at the top, Feeding Schedule, N. She stared at it, blinking, as if willing it to mean something else. Each row noted the time, the contents of the meal, a box for consumed, yes, no, and one marked behavior. Phrases like quiet today, cried after lights out, refused dinner, punished, were scattered across the margins in cramped handwriting. Occasionally, a checkmark appeared next to something labeled vitamin supplement. "Jesus," Monroe muttered, flipping through another tape. He had a system, a routine, like caring for a lab subject. Or a pet, Elise added, her voice flat. Toward the bottom of the box was a small wooden Toya hand-carved elephant with one eye chipped away. Elise didn't have to touch it to know it matched the one they'd found in the underground room. The pieces were all aligning now, horrifying in their precision. Gerald Massey hadn't just hidden Noah. He had raised him in captivity, unseen and unknown, beneath the feet of thousands of passers-by. He had isolated him from the world, documented his days like entries in a twisted experiment. And then, somewhere along the way, he vanished. Elise closed the notebook, her hands cold despite the summer air. The worst part, she realized, wasn't what Massey had done. It was how easily he had gotten away with it. The hum of the old VHS player filled the precinct's media room, a low, static drone that set everyone's teeth slightly on edge. The tape crackled to life with that familiar warbled flicker, and then there it was, footage grainy and gray, the color washed out by time, but the subject unmistakable. Noah. He couldn't have been older than 4 in the first recording, seated cross-legged on a thin mattress in the concrete room Elise had stepped into weeks earlier. The space was nearly identical, but in this version, it was alive barely. A small battery-powered lantern flickered in the corner, toys lined up with unnatural precision, and at the center, the boy. Too still for a child his age. Too quiet. The voice came next. Off camera. Calm. Measured. Not angry, but instructive, like a teacher or a father reading rules from an invisible book. Good boys stay in. Bad boys go out. And what happens when you go out? Noah didn't answer at first. He rocked slightly, arms wrapped around himself. The voice pressed on. Say it. They take you, the boy whispered. That's right, the voice said. And what do they do when they take you? A long silence. Then, they burn you. Monroe exhaled sharply beside Elise, his fists clenched in his lap. Another tape. This one dated a year later. Noah, now maybe 5, stacking plastic cups into a pyramid. A hand-thick calloused reaches in from the side and knocks the tower over. The voice doesn't yell, doesn't curse. It just says, mistakes like that are why your mother left. Noah flinches, then apologizes. More footage. Time moves forward in seconds and years. A birthday Noah sits alone at the edge of the mattress, a cupcake with a candle already melted sideways. A lesson in geography where every country is described as unsafe, polluted, violent. A segment Elise couldn't finish. Where Gerald reads aloud a twisted bedtime story, he wrote himself a tale of a boy who escaped and was eaten by wolves. The final tape shows Noah at perhaps 10 or 11, eyes dim, voice flat. He recites the daily routine like a chant. Wake, eat, clean, recite rules, no contact, no crying. The screen went black. No credits, no explanation. Just the raw residue of control and isolation. Elise turned off the player. They weren't just recordings, she said. They were reinforcements. That man didn't just hide Noah. He rewrote him. The rain tapped softly against the windows of the counseling center, steady as breath. Jonah sat with his knees pulled up on the couch, arms wrapped around his shins, eyes cast toward the muted gray sky. Amanda was there, beside him but not too close, her presence steady, quiet. Dr. Hanley's voice was calm, encouraging. The kind of voice that made you feel like the truth could be said aloud without shattering the room. I didn't plan to leave, Jonah began, his voice thin, almost surprised at itself. I didn't even know I could. I thought he'd always be there. Amanda watched him, her eyes glistening, saying nothing. I woke up and something was different. It was quiet, but not the usual quiet, not the controlled kind. Jonah's fingers picked at the hem of his sleeve. He didn't bring breakfast, didn't unlock the slot, didn't talk. He took a breath, slow and ragged. After a few hours I knocked. No answer. I waited longer. I don't know how long I didn't have clocks, but the light in the hallway didn't come on. I finally pushed the door. It creaked open. That made Amanda flinch. The image of her child finally crossing the threshold of the world he'd been caged in for years filled her with equal parts horror and hope. He was on the floor, Jonah said, voice distant. Just lying there. His eyes were open, but not seeing. I watched him for a long time, thinking he was testing me. That if I ran, he'd be angry. That it was a trick. Dr. Hanley asked gently, "How did you leave?" Jonah looked up then, as if startled by the question. There was a vent. I'd seen him use it before, when the water stopped working once. I didn't know where it went. I just crawled. I kept crawling until I couldn't hear anything anymore. He paused, his voice lowering. The outside was too bright. The air felt wrong, loud, cold. I didn't know what to do, so I walked. Slept behind dumpsters, ate from trash bins. Kept moving, no names, no talking, just watching from far away. Amanda finally reached out, slowly, and let her fingers rest on his wrist. "You survived," she whispered. Jonah didn't answer, but for the first time since they found him, he let her touch stay. The mornings were the hardest. Amanda learned that quickly how the smallest things could unravel him before the sun was fully up. The smell of toast burning in the toaster, a garbage truck's sudden hiss outside. The flicker of a television screen turning to static for just a moment too long. She kept the lights low, the windows open, the volume soft. Every choice deliberate, every movement cautious. She didn't hover, but she was always there in the kitchen, in the hallway, just within reach. Jonah rarely called for her, but when he did, it was always in the middle of silence. No preamble, no urgency. Just her name, spoken low and fragile, like a child asking the dark to back away. He slept in the guest room. His room, now, no locked doors. She gave him full choice over the color of the bedding, the placement of the furniture, the closet light that never had to be turned off unless he asked. He picked a navy comforter and lined the windowsill with small rocks he'd collected from the yard, naming each one with sounds instead of words. Sometimes she caught him staring at the dishwasher or the washing machine, mesmerized by the rhythm, the lights, the certainty of function. Other times, she found him crouched in the hallway, not doing anything, just breathing. "You don't have to be quiet," she told him one night, crouching beside him as he sat curled near the baseboard heater. "This is your home now." "I don't know how to be loud," he whispered. The doctor said the gaps in his memory were both blessing and burden. Some details would never return, faces, sounds, entire stretches of time wiped clean. But the feelings remained, deeply rooted. He flinched when someone moved too quickly. He apologized for knocking over a glass with the kind of panic that suggested punishment was muscle deep. He never asked about Gerald, not directly. But Amanda caught glimpses when he'd start a sentence and stop mid-thought, or when he'd hesitate before touching something new, like he was waiting for permission that would never come. And then, there were the drawings. Crayons, again something about them soothed him. He'd sit at the kitchen table and sketch for hours. Tunnels, shadows, blank faces, then suddenly a house with windows, a tree, a boy and a woman holding hands, drawn without eyes. Each line told her the same story. He was here. But not yet whole. The first camera van arrived just after sunrise. Amanda watched from behind the living room curtain as two men with windbreakers and coffee cups set up a tripod on the corner of her street. By noon, there were 6 of them, satellite dishes rotating like heads, searching for a scent. Reporters waited on the sidewalk, shifting from foot to foot, some holding printed photos of Jonah's face from years ago, smiling, 3 years old, frozen in time. Amanda refused every interview. She let the voicemail fill up, let the emails go unanswered. Jonah wasn't ready for this world, not yet, maybe not ever. She taped a sign to the front door in block letters. "No media, no comments, respect our family." It didn't stop them. A drone buzzed over the backyard. A woman with perfect teeth knocked on the door under the guise of offering groceries. One anchor left flowers on the porch with a handwritten note. "If you ever want to share your sit-on, your terms, we'd be honored." But it was the past that proved most persistent. Her name was Dana Price, a former local news reporter turned freelance investigator. Amanda remembered her vaguely from those early weeks. She'd been the only one who seemed genuinely angry, not just sad. Now she was back, and this time, she wasn't knocking. She was digging. Articles began surfacing on quiet corners of the internet, then climbing to larger platforms. Reports about a janitor's quiet termination, a dismissed complaint from another employee who claimed Massey had been creeping around after hours. One security guard admitted to Dana, anonymously, that the camera glitch on the day Noah vanished had occurred once before, but had been chalked up to a faulty cable and ignored. There had been no follow-up. Amanda sat at the kitchen table, reading the latest headline, "How Rosebridge Mall let a predator slip through cracks no one was watching." She closed the laptop slowly. "You okay?" Jonah's voice came from behind her. He hovered in the doorway, unsure of his place in the room. Amanda turned to him. "They're asking questions they should have asked 18 years ago," she said. "Not your burden." He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the laptop. "Maybe it should be. Maybe some questions deserve answers. Amanda stood, walked to him, and pressed a hand to his cheek. Not at the cost of your peace. He didn't answer. Neither of them was sure yet what peace even looked like. The file came in a battered cardboard box, half covered in dust and sealed with masking tape that had yellowed with age. It was Elise who found it, tucked in the backroom archives of a now-defunct custodial staffing agency. She'd made the drive herself, unwilling to trust the fragile weight of these forgotten records to a scanner or courier. Some things had to be read in person. Inside were decades of employment record-typed resumes, hand-signed contracts, evaluations written in blue ballpoint ink. Gerald Massey's file was near the bottom, thick and disorderly. His resume was short, work history scattered, schools, hospitals, malls. He never stayed more than a few years anywhere, sometimes just months. There were warning signs, hidden between the polite language of HR speak. Inappropriate proximity to students, boundary concerns raised by staff, unexplained access to restricted areas. In one evaluation, a principal at an elementary school in Ohio had written, "Mr. Massey's work is consistent, but his presence often unsettles children. I've had several complaints about him watching the younger classes during recess when not assigned to those zones." And then, buried deep in the back of the folder, a single typed incident report. Date: March 3, 2003. Location: Hillside Children's Hospital, Maintenance Department. Subject: Gerald Massey. Summary: Nurse reported Massey seen exiting staff, only hallway near pediatric observation ward. Claimed he got turned around, though the hallway was clearly marked. No evidence of harm or inappropriate contact. Internal note: recommend review of keycard access and termination of contract. There were no criminal charges, no police reports, nothing formal, just trails of discomfort and decisions not to follow through. Gerald had always left before anything could stick. Elise sat at her desk that night, long after the others had gone home, pages spread out before her like puzzle pieces no one had tried to connect. She thought of Jonah Noah huddled in that concrete room for years, taught to fear a world he'd never seen, and she thought of how close Gerald had come before. How many other places he might have hovered just outside notice. People had known. Not enough to act, but enough to feel it. And no one had stopped him. The system hadn't failed. It had never been paying attention. The building was Modesta converted brick church at the edge of town, its steeple long since removed and replaced with a weathered wooden sign that now read, "The Haven." It didn't look like much, and Amanda liked it that way. No fanfare, no marble floors, just warmth, soft lighting, a kettle always on. A place where grief didn't need to be explained to be understood. She opened it quietly, without a press conference or ribbon cutting, just a handful of volunteers and her own savings, pooled with help from others who had known that same silence, that same waiting. Parents of the missing. Families with too many unanswered questions and too few people willing to hear them. Inside, there were couches, not chairs. Art supplies instead of clipboards. Every wall had bulletin boards, some covered in flyers. Others with handprints, photos, messages scrawled in marker. "Come home, we love you." "Still searching." "Never stop believing." Amanda spent her mornings there, helping people fill out forms, navigate police processes, sit through court hearings, or simply breathe. There were days she cried with them. Others, she just sat. Her presence alone was enough. A mother who had lived through the impossible and now made space for those still walking through it. Jonah came by sometimes, not often. But when he did, he always lingered by the doorway, a few seconds longer than necessary, eyes drifting across the photos pinned up, faces he didn't know but somehow recognized. He didn't speak to the other families, not yet. But he painted. That was new. His therapist said healing wouldn't be a straight line, and it wasn't. Some days he was almost present. Others he slipped away into silence, his eyes somewhere far behind the room. But slowly, like thawing ice, something inside him had started to shift. In sessions, he spoke about the boy he had been, the one who lived by rules, by silence, by shadows, and the man he was now, who wasn't sure if he was allowed to be more than that. "He knew how to survive," Jonah said once, voice quiet. "But I don't know if he knew how to live." Dr. Hanley asked gently, "Do you think you do?" Jonah looked out the window of the small office, the light catching on his profile like it was trying to learn his shape. "I'm trying," he said. "I think that's the start." The air was different this time. Elise unlocked the maintenance door with steady hands, though she could feel her pulse in her throat. Behind her, Amanda and Jonah waited in silence, neither of them speaking as the hinges groaned open and the dark corridor exhaled its stale breath. Dust floated in lazy spirals through the shaft of Elise's flashlight, illuminating the same path she had walked weeks before only. Now, it felt heavier, more sacred. The walls hadn't changed. The concrete was still cracked, the air still cold, the silence still thick. But the presence was different, not haunted anymore, just hollow, emptied of its secrets. Jonah stepped inside last, moving slowly, deliberately. He didn't flinch, he didn't freeze, he just looked. He ran his hand along the wall where he had once carved his initials, N.R. Faint now, weathered by time and dust, but still there. Amanda stood near the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She hadn't wanted to come, hadn't wanted him to return to this place. But Jonah had asked, quietly, firmly. He carried a drawing in one hand, folded twice, the edges worn from being held too tightly. "I need to leave something," he had said in the car. "Something that's mine, not his." Now, in the center of the room where the mattress had once sat, Jonah crouched and smoothed the paper flat on the floor. Elise moved closer, careful not to disturb the silence that had settled like a fragile shell around him. The drawing was simple crayon on textured paper. A small boy, stick-limbed and smiling, held hands with a taller woman under a bright scribbled sun. The sky above them was blue. The grass below was green. It was drawn the way children always do, bold colors, impossible proportions, joy pressed into every line. Amanda brought a hand to her mouth. Jonah didn't speak as he stood. He didn't need to. He left the drawing where it lay, a declaration, a burial, a goodbye. Something to claim the space not as Gerald's, not as a prison, but as part of a story reclaimed. "Let's go," he said softly. They left the room together, sealing the door one final time behind them. Not to forget, but to finish.